guys, and welcome to episode 146 of the OCDStories.com podcast. Now, in this episode, I did some face-to-face interviews, 5 in fact, at OCD Action's head office. OCD Action are a charity here in the UK, obviously focused on OCD, and they were kind enough to give up of their time, so I interviewed some of their staff, some of their volunteers, specifically asking questions around what it's like to have OCD at work, and also focusing mainly on advice. So, what's helped them, sort of self-care, whether they've spoken to their boss about it. Obviously, they're all at OCD Action, so they've kind of most likely talked about it there, but their jobs before this. So I just wanted to go into that in a bit more detail, because I know for me, a few years ago, working when I was stuck in my head was really tough. So I wanted to do an episode dedicated to this to hopefully get some advice to share with you guys. Some of the advice is sort of UK specific, so do speak to your local mental health charity or OCD charity for more sort of working rights, and also, HR teams are going to vary. So when we talk about HR, do your sort of due diligence and investigate that to find what access you have to help and support. And obviously, depending on the country, the amount of stigma that may or may not be there. So, take it with a pinch of salt, but I really enjoyed this episode, and I think, their personal stories around having OCD and working, and a couple of them don't have OCD, however, they're obviously involved with the charities. It's interesting to get their take as well. There's also some talk around advice for companies on how they can help people with OCD and HR teams. So if you are a company owner, hopefully this is helpful for you. If not, maybe you could share it with a company owner. But a lot of it is focused on having OCD and working. How do you kind of manage that, which was really what I wanted to address. Obviously, I'm sure there's a million things to do with having OCD and work. We couldn't cover it all. Hopefully this goes some way to giving you some support. So thank you to Olivia, Layla, Liam, Nick and Charlie from OCD Action for their time. I deeply appreciate it. And obviously, thank you to OCD Action, the charity, for being involved with this project. And without further ado, here is 5 guests. Welcome to the podcast, Charlie.
Glad to be here.
It's good to have you here. So obviously we're talking about work today. So does OCD still affect you in the workplace? And sort of if so, how?
I mean, OCD does still affect me. But I mean, I went through a course of CBT a couple of years ago, and I consider myself mostly recovered.
Yeah.
Although it does obviously still affect me in some ways, but it's a lot more manageable. In terms of in the workplace, I think actually quite a big part of my recovery was working here at OCD Action because, well, I mean, at the time when I was going through therapy, I was only a volunteer, but being in this environment where you never have to worry about whether people are going to understand what you're going through, you always know, like, people are if you're having a bad day with your intrusive thoughts,
just get it.
Yeah, you're never going to have to worry about disclosing stuff because if you kind of talk about stuff like kind of, sort of violent or sexual intrusive thoughts, that no one's gonna give you a funny look. People are going to understand it. So Absolutely. It's just that sense of being in an environment where people, because I know the reality for a lot of people with OCD, which was the reality with me for years, is that they can't talk about it with anyone. That they, I didn't tell anyone for about 5 or 6 years. Yeah. So I think being in this kind of environment just makes such a difference, because it's just, even if you're not saying anything, that people around you understand it.
Absolutely.
And talk about it as if it's common knowledge. So it's it's very good, very supportive environment.
No, that's a really good point. And were you working anywhere before this? Did OCD kind of flare up in those scenarios?
Yes, I mean, I used to work in retail for Marks and Spencer, which I hated. I was all right for a while, but my OCD was I went through various different phases with it. When I was working there about 4 years, and at some points it was quite bad. I was never kind of at the level where I couldn't go into work. which I know is the reality for a lot of people, but that doesn't mean I wasn't seriously affected, because I'd be going into work, but I'd be just suffering all day. I used to work in the women's shoes department of a big M&S store, and I used to have so many intrusive thoughts about using the shoes as weapons against people.
The big stilettos or whatever they are.
So so I'd just be on the shop floor, and I'd be like, a customer would just give me a funny look, because I'd be like having an intrusive thought, and I'd just like be kind of, doing like a pulse, like kind of doing a disgusted face, and kind of like, I don't know, I don't know how it must have come off to a lot of people, but it was mostly invisible. It was just like I'd be going through my day, but I'd be struggling underneath.
No, that's really tough. And was there anything you did in those moments, whether it's like kind of get off the shop floor, or anything to almost cope in that moment? Yeah,
sometimes there was, I'd sometimes just like retreat into the stock room and just just kind of say stuff to myself in my head, or kind of do my compulsions, and it was I just want to get away. It was, I mean, that wasn't always possible, because if I was with a customer or something,
of course,
but a very different environment to here, where in fairness, I was in a different stage with my, like towards the end of it was when I'd started volunteering here, when I did start being more open about it. But it's like very different when you don't know how people are going to react. And
that's a very good point. And I suppose you weren't doing CBT at that point, is that?
No, I started CBT a few months before I left. I left retail. When I'd started volunteering here, but hadn't started working here.
Okay. Did your therapist tie in any of the treatment to the workplace?
Not that I can think of, really. Although, as I say, like, I think being a volunteer here at the time, like, made a huge difference and made it easier for me to go through the therapy, because I could talk about people here.
Okay.
Talk about it with people.
And
people here.
Was it, literally just the community of being understood here that kind of helped? Were there any other sort of benefits of working here?
Well, just you learn so much more about OCD. That's just true, through meeting so many people with it, and just like seeing how far so many people have come. When you've got people who were, I think, when you're in the throes of OCD, there's a tendency to almost think that it couldn't possibly be worse than what you're going through. But I was, meeting people who'd been kind of even, compared even more ill than I'd be. Like people who kind of couldn't leave their room. Or people who'd been going through OCD for decades, but who'd still managed to come through. It's very inspiring. And of course, you also do have the opposite effect, where you kind of encounter lots of people who've been sort of experiencing OCD for years, and like nothing has been helping them get better, which can sort of have the opposite effect. But I think overall, it's kind of very just meeting so many people of all different shapes and sizes, like with OCD,
different
that just
backgrounds, and
it starts to feel like you're just seeing how many people have it, and how it doesn't kind of define you as a person.
No, absolutely. OCD doesn't. OCD is an equal opportunities illness. It doesn't care sort of who you are. It will. Right. So next question is, I guess, words of wisdom or inspiration for those who are currently finding it difficult to work while having OCD.
Well, I mean, I think sort of take a look at our staff team, really, because it's not everyone at not everyone working for OCD Action has OCD, but a huge proportion of us do. And we're all in kind of various different stages of our OCD, but we've all managed to recover to the extent that we can actually help other people
Yeah.
with it. And, I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily have been confident even kind of talking about it.
Yeah.
But now I've got to the level where we can talk about it openly enough that we're using it to help other people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's there. You can, obviously not everyone responds the same way to treatment, but it is possible for a lot of people to recover, even if it seems impossible, and get to the stage where you can, it's not affecting your work life to a significant extent.
Absolutely. No, good words. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else you wanted to say or share around this topic? Or?
OCD Action is just a fantastic place to work for. It's the most kind of inspiring environment, and it's just find I think it's important to find a workplace where you are comfortable and you don't feel people responding badly to your mental health issues, and that it's, if people are discriminating against you at work, it's not you, it's them.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
And also just to say, OCD Action's advocacy service can do a lot for people who are being discriminated in their workplace. So if anyone is going through issues with work not treating them well because of their OCD, get in touch with our advocacy service.
Really good. Yeah, that's a good service. Welcome to the podcast, Olivia.
Thank you.
I should say welcome back. You were, of course, on the show before.
Yes.
So anyone listening can check that out. It's the episode I did about OCD Action, which is where we are now. So the first question then is does OCD still affect you in the workplace? And if so, how?
I would say yes and no. It's actually quite timely that this podcast should be recorded today, because I actually had a particularly bad day yesterday, and a day that I've not really had for quite a long time, like in how much it sort of affected my ability to work.
Yeah.
And it wasn't for any particular reason. It was sort of nothing that I could pinpoint it to. But I just seemed to be, hit with a particularly bad bout of anxiety yesterday, and really actually struggled to concentrate on work to the point where I stayed late because I felt so guilty about not having done enough during the day. I would say generally sort of 95% of the time it doesn't impact on my work at all, but I would probably say I'm sort of 90% well, giving a lot of percentages out. But generally it doesn't impact on my ability to work. I think that's because obviously working at a charity which deals with OCD, you're very relaxed in being able to take a little bit of time out if you need it, able to say to somebody, I just need a moment, or do you mind if I come in an hour late today because I'm struggling, I'll stay an hour later. There's a lot of flexibility. Obviously, you couldn't work in a more understanding place. And I think that eases a lot of like anxiety initially anyway. And then generally I would say I'm quite well. But yesterday was an example of where it did really affect my work, and I couldn't be in a better place in terms of, with loads of people who understand OCD and who are really compassionate about it. But it did kind of shock me, I guess, into thinking, okay, this still can have an effect. Like even when you're well, you can hit a really bad day for no apparent reason. But I just, went home, practiced a lot of self-care, just gave myself a bit of a break with it, and then came back and have worked fine today, and it hasn't affected my work. So the short answer to your question is yes and no. Okay,
brilliant. And so based on kind of, I guess, yesterday, and you did mention some of it, but also historically other jobs you may have had, what are some of those things that you do? You mentioned about kind of taking some time out or maybe coming in a bit later, work dependent, obviously. But is there anything else you've done historically that you've found really helped you in those moments where it was tough?
I think for me, it's always been the last... I'm trying to think, the last sort of 3-4 places I've worked, the people I've worked with have known about my OCD. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I think that's always been a really big thing for me, because I I would struggle to try and hide it. And I think the anxiety of trying to hide something or thinking I need to hide something would make me more anxious. It would kind of become a vicious like cycle in itself. So I think having people around me, even if it's just one person, it's not necessarily, you know, the person in charge of you, but just having somebody there who, you know, you're able to speak to if you're having a particularly bad time has always been really helpful. In a job I was in before this, you know, I was able to say, you know, I'm having a particularly bad day, I might be a little bit late, and not have to worry about, you know, them wondering why that is or asking questions. They just know not to ask. So I found that particularly helpful. Like I said before, just having some time out. I mean, self-care is not something I'm particularly good at. Like I did okay like yesterday, but generally I worry so much about having wasted somebody's time or the implications that could have, and almost start to become obsessed about, you know, what that could do, you know, for not working hard enough, basically, because of my anxiety, that I do give myself quite a hard time. So I think surrounding myself with people who can tell me to take a break, you know, friends, you know, a partner, family members who just go, just relax, like you know, you do enough. Everybody needs some time out, whether you have OCD or not. Everybody needs to take some time out. Surrounding yourself with those type of people who can remind you of that really helps me. And then I guess distraction as well is always helpful, isn't it? You know, taking yourself out for a walk, like not just sitting and staring at your computer screen, as I am sometimes guilty of doing. Just getting up, you know, having a little walk around, talking to somebody. Those things are always quite helpful.
Cool. No, thank you for that. And as you mentioned there before, some of your past workplaces where you had a friend or a colleague or someone you could share with, how did you bring up those conversations? To initially say that you have OCD? Yeah,
I guess it's quite tricky. The last place I worked before, well, one of the last places I worked before this, about 6 years ago, I think, was actually as a nanny. When I first moved to London, I was looking after a lovely little girl. I was volunteering for OCD Action at the time, and I was working as a nanny sort of full time in between that. And the mum of the little girl, actually, she knew quite a lot about OCD. She'd seen some programs about it before, and she actually pointed it out when I sort of first arrived. I sort of remember her saying, like, I've seen you speak about OCD before, like you've done some articles or you've done something, I kind of recognise your face. And it just, I mean, that's pure coincidence that she just happened to watch some TV programs or seen some articles or, you know, hear some things, which was really useful. So immediately that conversation was just eased in, and it was, you know, very sort of, you were almost relaxed.
Forced to have it.
Basically there was no sort of way out of that one. But it is it's a hard conversation to have, obviously. I think if you've never spoken to anybody about it before, that's incredibly hard to have that conversation. And I know before I told anybody about OCD or felt comfortable talking about it, there was a few jobs I worked where I would never mention it and I would try and hide it, and it would really impact on my work, my ability to work. And it would be much harder to do the job with them not knowing. And I never knew how to start those conversations. So I'd be a hypocrite to give out like any sort of good advice about it. But I guess if you haven't told anybody before, then telling a friend or family member first is probably maybe a little bit easier. And then once you feel comfortable talking to them about it, you know, maybe you'll feel comfortable telling somebody at work, and it might not be your line manager or your manager in the first instance. Maybe it's just like a really friendly colleague or somebody else who's going through a bad time who you can support, who then can end up supporting you back.
That's true.
I don't have any sort of magic tips, unfortunately, but I guess, if you're not comfortable telling somebody at work in the first instance, just try telling somebody, whether that's a stranger on an OCD forum or a helpline. Talking to them about it first might just ease that initial worry of how people are going to react.
Absolutely, and the forum's, I guess, a good idea and good place, and you guys have a forum to plug that.
We do.
And you can continue the dialogue of this podcast on there and just ask questions, particularly work-related questions. How do I do X, Y, and Z? What advice has anyone experienced? And you'll probably get plenty of answers there. Yeah. Okay. No, thank you for that. Let me get my questions up. So what kind of words of wisdom do you have for those who are currently finding it difficult to work while having OCD?
I think it's a case of, there's no sort of like one size fits all with this. I guess I think I found working quite helpful. I find sort of a lot of time on my own or time being at home on my own my OCD generally gets worse.
Oh, okay.
If I'm around other people, it tends to be a little bit at bay. So I think I found working quite helpful. I think it's just knowing what your limits are, not, picking a job, or I know we can't all just pick our job, but, sort of trying to choose a job or a career where, there either is a bit of flexibility if that's what you need. For me, it's getting to work. If I had to start a job at 9 o'clock, I would really, really struggle with that. So having a bit of flexibility is really helpful. Maybe it's doing a job that isn't full time, maybe just easing yourself in. So just, cutting down to 1-2 days a week or part time. Maybe just volunteering for the time being. If people aren't able to hold down a full-time job, that's completely fine. And there's loads of amazing places that you can volunteer, and you can have a bit more flexibility, because obviously the company that you volunteer for will be very grateful for any time you're able to spare. So that can be a really useful tool. And I think, as I said before, I volunteered at OCD Action for, this isn't a plug, by the way, but I volunteered at OCD Action just to try and ease myself into that working environment. And I found that really helpful to get into sort of working full time. So I think that's really important, and just not putting too much pressure on yourself. Like, at the end of the day, like, a job's a job, and obviously it's really important. And if you commit to a job, obviously you want to do well, but the job's not as important as you and your health. And like, to do something, you need to be healthy and well. So if you're feeling like you're struggling with that, or you're not able to concentrate properly, like, don't be too hard on yourself. Take some time out. You don't, you would take time off sick if you had a cold, or you had the flu, or you broke something. So your brain is like just as important in that sense. And you don't need to go into details with people. If you need a little bit of time off, you can just say, I'm not well today, I'm going to take some time off. I know sometimes it's not that easy, but you shouldn't have to explain yourself. You should be able to take that time that you need, like, for your mental health as well as your physical health. I think people forget that sometimes, and don't feel, even now, like, if I had a bad day, I think I would struggle to say, like, oh, I'm having a bad mental health day, even though you know that the response to that is going to be like, of course, take as much time as you need. But I think there's just this stigma around us taking time off, because we just need a bit of, like, self-care for a day.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really important. Easing yourself into work, like I said, having support around you. So maybe it's just somebody you can call during the day if you're having a stressful time. Obviously, then all the usual stuff, like taking regular breaks and, making sure you're, I don't know, healthy, having some walks, all that kind of stuff. That would be my words of wisdom. They're not so wise words.
No, they're really good. I think there was loads in that, and that's awesome. I think, as you said, getting up away from your computer, and especially if you work in an office, which is what I've done most of my life so far, is sitting down most of the day and then not moving, and then it's front of a screen, often no light. So just getting up, kind of going for that walk. Talking to someone if you can. And I mean, there are more and more companies now with kind of mental health policies, and you can kind of do some research online if you're thinking about applying somewhere. Look, especially if it's a big brand, whether it's on a retail shop floor or it's in an office or wherever, they often have kind of their HR sort of guidelines. And if, like, this is actually a really important point, which I haven't said yet, but reasonable adjustments are, you have a right to have adjustments made if you need them. And that comes under, like, your sort of employment rights. So there's loads of information on the OCD Action website, which will describe this a lot better than I can. But if you have disclosed your OCD to your employer, you are legally allowed to ask for reasonable adjustments to be made. So that might be things like starting work 10 minutes later or having flexible working hours. It might be things like having a break every hour, not having to attend meetings in person if you find it too difficult. Having your own desk space instead of having to hot desk, just things like that, things that you might find just ease it just ever so slightly for you. That's, your right to have those adjustments made. So if anybody is sort of sat there thinking like, oh, it would be so much easier for me to not have to move desks or not have to attend this meeting, like, have a look on the OCD Action website, because there is actually some really useful fact sheets on OCD and employment, and what your rights are and how you can get that sorted. If you ping me those, I can add them into the show notes.
That would be great.
And obviously that's UK law, so anyone who's outside the UK, you have to speak to your local charity, or I'm not sure who you'd speak to.
I mean, people can get in touch with us, and we've got an amazing advocacy team, so if they can offer any, words of wisdom, or they
yeah.
can point you in the right direction of other organisations as well, which might be able to help with stuff like that.
Cool. There you go. Is there anything else, any parting words you want to share with the listeners?
Oh, this is where I want to say something really wise, but I don't have anything. And I just think, like I said before, I just want to reiterate the point, like, put yourself first. No job is as important as your health is, no matter what you do. And it's amazing if you're able to work and have OCD, because I always describe OCD as having like a full-time job anyway, like in your head. So I feel like you're sometimes doing 2 full-time jobs, and people don't realize how much is going on. I've lost where I was going with that. I've gone off on a tangent.
Take care of yourself.
But to take care of yourself. Like, at the end of the day, like, your health is most important. If you're not able to work, don't feel guilty about it. Like, that's completely fine and completely understandable. If you are able to work, just make sure you're looking after yourself and taking some time and practicing lots of self-care, which I will also take my own words of advice and do more of that as well. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here. So does OCD affect you in the workplace currently?
Not so much anymore, to be honest. It has in the past, but these days I'm much better than I was. Not that I was ever really bad, but it occasionally reared its ugly head. And occasionally it can do, and I kind of know from all my therapy in the past to quickly squash it. Kind of nip it in the bud. Absolutely. And I know roughly what to do.
Yeah, brilliant. And historically then, at sort of other jobs, when OCD was kind of beating on you a bit, what did you kind of do to, I guess feel a bit better while being in the workplace? Did you have any sort of coping strategies or anything like that?
Not so much. I mean, most of my OCD was kind of not involved in anything I work in, so there wasn't, the triggers weren't there. And I work in IT in my kind of like day-to-day job, and it can be quite a thing that you can focus on. You can get involved with a problem and get stuck into it, and it's quite good as like it's quite intense in terms of you're thinking quite hard, and so you can kind of things don't kind of creep in because you are like
100% focused.
100% focused, and that's been quite useful.
I mean that's a good thing to know. To find something that just gets you in that state of flow or really engages you. Where, it is often those times where you're kind of alone with your thoughts is when it would creep in.
Yes, definitely.
Olivia mentioned about distractions and having those, and work can be a good distraction. So have you ever had to sort of open up to an employer or a boss or colleague or anyone?
Well, I've always been quite frank with certain colleagues, but to my bosses previously, not directly, because like most people with OCD, that it isn't that severe. Not that I'm quite good at hiding it, which I think a lot of people are. You can kind of, while you double checking the bin or something like that, you can go, I thought I wasn't sure. Exactly. So I've always been quite skilled at kind of disguising it. In the past, when I've had to arrange therapy, and obviously that impacts on timing, like going late into work or having time off, I've always been relatively vague and to say, I've got like a regular doctor's appointment. And I think all employers really these days are quite receptive because, employee well-being is important, to most companies. And therefore, I'd always say to people that you don't need to be 100% truthful. You just need to be, if you're speaking to an HR department, for example, just to say, I'm having a regular appointment with just for some health related issues. Is it okay that I come in late every Wednesday, say about 11 o'clock, and I'll make up the time? And I've never been asked for more details. And to be honest, I don't see why not that I would be particularly embarrassed by it. But if I think that's probably the best way. Most companies I've heard of will always be, that's fine, that's not a problem.
That's a good point. Really good point. Don't quote me on this, anyone listening, but I think, at least in the UK, if you tell HR something, they're bound to confidentiality.
Yes, most definitely.
But also clarify with them just to be safe, in case you got any gossips in the HR team. Okay, now that was really good. And are there any kind of words of wisdom for those currently who are working but have OCD and maybe struggling a bit?
Any words of wisdom
or inspiration or hope?
Well, to be honest, it's although OCD is like a horrible condition, don't get me wrong. It is one of the things that when you are working, you're still functioning, and so although it's hard, you're still, it does impact on your life, but you're still managing to hold down a job, etc., etc. And I think that's quite important that it's, although it's taking up a lot of your time, at least your life is still got some benefit. You're still, it's something that is just, it's not 100% of you. What I'm trying to say is that a lot of people with OCD are, some people with very terrible OCD, they're kind of housebound, etc.
Yeah.
And I've always equated that, okay, when my OCD's been bad, it's been bad, but I've been quite fortunate that it's not got that bad and I can still hold down a job. Occasionally I have like wobbles and I might spend 10 minutes in the bathroom washing my hands or something like that.
Yeah.
But I always think, well, actually, I'm quite fortunate that it's not as bad as maybe other people's. And therefore I'm thinking, well, I'm not, it's terribly selfish, I know, but it's not that bad. And therefore, if other people can get help, and I know people who have got very seriously have got much better, then I can just cling on to think, actually, I should logically be able to get better myself.
Yeah. And
so in the past, even when I've been in kind of my OCD's always been quite episodic.
Okay.
So every 8 to 10 years, it kind of flares up.
Wow. Yeah.
And I've always managed to think, well, actually, I know the fact that fortunately I've never had it very seriously. Yeah. And I know that I can get better and will get better. And work is quite a good thing. I'm quite lucky that I enjoy my job, and it's something that I can kind of throw myself into.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's great advice. And was there anything else you wanted to share with the listeners while I have you?
No, I mean, the only thing is quite interesting actually is that obviously if you have, I mean, I have OCD and I've had OCD since I was very young, and as I say, it's episodic and it can creep in now and again, and I can catch myself at work occasionally doing like a little ritual. For example, I write computer code for a living, basically. Yeah. And I can find myself rereading in case I've written something down that I shouldn't have done. Yeah. And I can catch myself, and I can kind of use my ERP techniques to go, actually, I'm not going to reread that. And it's one of these things that it keeps the ERP approach fresh in my mind, so that I'm going, it's like a little blip will pop in there, and I'll go, actually, I'm now going to force myself not to give in to my OCD, even though that this is just, I don't have OCD about this particular thing. I've just got some random thought that occasionally pops in to say, oh, right, you've just written something terrible rather than some code, and someone's going to read it in a year's time, and then, and like they're kind of catastrophizing with it. Yeah. But I force myself, because I go, oh, right, I recognize what could be the openings of a compulsion. Yeah. And I force myself to not give into it. So even though these days I don't really have much OCD, occasionally I'll get like a little thought will pop in, and I go, I can actually still apply my ERP, which means in the future, if anything did come back, the strategy about how ERP works and how to not give into it is fresh in my mind. Yeah, so really that's good. Always something that I've always used, so that, as soon as something else crops up, I can usually nip it in the bud without any CBT with a professional, because I know the tools and techniques. Because occasionally I'll just use them just, like once a month, or when just some random thought pops into my head, which other people probably get anyway, the kind of strange thought that pops in. But I always go, all right, let's not give into it, recognize it, live with the thought, accept the anxiety. And therefore it still reminds me about how kind of the ERP side of things work.
Yeah, no, that's a really good reminder, because like you said, it's an ongoing thing, and if you can keep it going in those times that it's lower anxiety, you just keep that muscle strong, or that skill there. So then, if it ever comes up bad again, you've got it. It's in your head. ERP is not this like long forgotten skill that you left 2 years behind or whatever.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I mean, in the same way as it's slightly unrelated, but I think it's quite an interesting thing for people with OCD is that myself personally, I had quite bad contamination OCD when I was like 18.
Yeah.
So it's quite a while ago now, and I got it all sorted and fine. But I've still continually applied the kind of exposures to myself. Especially when my sister had nephews, and I forced myself to change many nappies, because even though I don't have the OCD anymore, it's kind of continually proving to myself that I've definitely got this conquered. I have licked this. Yeah. Although it's still changing a nappy. Yeah. And I imagine people listening to this podcast, it might kind of spike them. Yeah. And it still did me the blip. But again, it's even when you've got a handle on your OCD, it's always good to even just to almost like be smug to it and go, yeah, you used to have control of me, but now, and look at me now. Yeah. I'm literally like waving this red flag in front of the OCD ball by going, look, I'm changing all these nappies, regardless of how I used to be, and I think that's quite a useful thing. It's the continual ERP learning or exposures for yourself, even though they might not be necessary anymore. But it's quite good if you are a person who has over time had different kind of episodes of OCD. That's a brilliant example. No, thank you so much for sharing. I know the listeners will appreciate it. You're welcome. Thank you.
Cool. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
It's good to have you on. So you're volunteer at OCD Action.
I do.
Yeah. And I guess why volunteer here? What's your involvement with OCD?
Okay. Approximately 2 years ago, my son disclosed to me that he's got OCD. He's 27. Yeah. He hid it for approximately 20 years. And I was kind of one of those that didn't really understand what OCD is. I used to think it was putting an order in things. Yeah. So I wanted some knowledge in OCD, and I thought the only way to do it really is probably join a charity and understand OCD sufferers, and also how I can support my son and also give back. And yes, I've been here approximately 7 months, I think. Yeah. And I really enjoy it. Yeah. I really do enjoy it, and I've gained so much knowledge and understanding. Yeah.
Cool. No, thank you, and good for you for putting in the effort to try and understand it further. Yeah. Okay, so I overheard you in the office talking about raising awareness. You work in HR?
Yeah, I work in HR. Yeah.
It'd be good to just kind of share your experience with what you were saying.
I've worked in HR for almost 15 years, and since working at the charity and understanding what OCD is, I've never come across it in the workplace. Where we've got staff absence, they've never said, I've got OCD, I can't come into work because of my OCD. And talking to my colleagues at work, they don't have no understanding of OCD, or to even manage a member of staff who's got OCD. So what I plan to do is, put some awareness out there to my company of how people can be affected by their OCD, and it could mean that they can't come into work because of their OCD has had an impact on their mental health that morning. Yeah. And to be a bit more flexible with employees, really, and just understanding. We did have I've got an example a few months ago, actually. Yeah. A manager spoke to me about a member of staff who's acting strangely. That's how she put it, acting strangely. I said, okay, tell me about her acting strangely.
Yeah.
Well, the way that she stands, like she'll put one foot sideways, then back in, and do the same the other side. And she'll do it so many times. Then she will go into the kitchen, make a cup of tea, come out of the kitchen and say, do you want a cup of tea? Go back into the kitchen, come back out so many times asking, do you want a cup of tea? I said, oh, okay. Well, don't you think that's strange? And I said, well, why do you think that's strange? Looking at this lady's medical, she suffers with anxiety.
Okay.
So I thought maybe it's part of her OCD. She might have OCD.
Yeah.
I didn't know for definite, but it was just an example. And then I had to speak to the manager about, well, look, you know, I work for a charity, and though those are similar signs, she may have OCD, and that might be part of her anxiety. So you kind of just need to be understanding, have a chat with her, and just make sure that she's okay.
Yeah.
Everything in work okay. Just really reassure her that you're there and that she can come and talk to you.
Yeah.
So that was just an example, an experience that neither of us have had before.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's a really good example. And I think, it highlights that when people don't understand OCD, that to them that behaviour is weird, seems weird. But that was a good example of when employers understand more, there's less stigma, and then they will feel less. They will treat the person with OCD probably better, and they will probably feel less awkward themselves because they understand.
and that's the message I'd like to get across to my organisation, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to do some trainings, hopefully.
Yeah.
Good. And how else, I guess it's just general advice for any employers that may be listening. Hopefully there's some. What advice do you have for them that what can they do to make it better for people with OCD?
They need to make sure that they keep in touch, have regular meetings with their employee, reassure them that they're there and they're listening, understand that there might be occasions when if their OCD has an impact on their mental health, they may not be able to come into work, so they can be a bit more flexible with the employees. They're the key things, really, but mainly understanding and being being flexible.
Cool. Any sort of final thoughts or words of hope for people with OCD listening?
There is always somebody that's listening and that will support them. And there is hope and light at the end of the tunnel. They will get better. They will get better. Yeah.
Good way to end.
My son is, so they definitely will.
Okay, fantastic. No, thank you for sharing and for coming on.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Cool. So what's your involvement with the charity and with OCD generally?
I've been involved with the charity for almost 4 months. Yeah. And my involvement is I'm a helpline volunteer.
Cool.
I haven't actually taken any calls yet because I'm still going through the training of it. Yeah. But I've been responding to emails and voicemails and shadowing quite a lot of the calls that other people have made. And I'm soon going to be taking calls, hopefully next week.
Yeah. Excellent. No, I'm sure the charity's glad to have you. And yeah, we were speaking before, you said you had some experience at the college you work at with OCD.
Yeah, I work in a sixth form college in Hackney, cool. Part of the SEND department, and OCD's come up a few times alongside a lot of other mental health issues that students have. It's not come up as much as anxiety and depression and things like that, but it's still come up a little bit.
Yeah, okay. And obviously for a student, kind of their education is effectively their job. They need to see it through to kind of eventually get a paying job. What are some of the things you say to them or encourage them to do to kind of keep them focused on their studies?
Well, recently I found myself, particularly with the older students when they're over 18, a lot of my job is getting them kind of referred to the appropriate services, the IAPT and things like that. Yeah. Quite a lot of the time there isn't really much information that young people are aware of when it comes to getting treatment. Yeah. And that's true for most sort of mental health issues that we've come across. So a lot of what I'm trying to do is get them to address their mental health issues with professionals. Yeah. But obviously when something like OCD is occurring, it's very difficult for students sometimes to even get into the college. Yeah. We've managed to make a lot of reasonable adjustments for students when they're at home. Things like getting work sent home when they literally are not in a position to leave the house at all. Yeah. I spend a lot of time on the phone now with students that are even text messages if they're not particularly keen on taking phone calls, giving advice to what they can be doing in terms of accessing work if they're taking time off. Yeah. And also a lot of it is sometimes being a little bit forceful with them to make sure that they are actually doing their CBT homework, or just putting in things in place for themselves to look after themselves going forward. Yeah. That's sort of more where my position is at the moment.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. And based off kind of what you've learned so far in your volunteer training, is there anything you feel people with OCD who are in the workplace or at college could do when they're finding it particularly tough on a day? Any sort of coping strategies you've come across?
Well, I know there's quite a lot of legal protection for people that have OCD. And I think the main thing is if they are in a position to do so is to let their employer know. Generally, I think HR departments are pretty good. And when they're not, there's quite a strong kind of legal response when they're not good enough. So I think I've found with people that I've worked with before as well that I think workplaces are probably more supportive than you might think they would be. So I personally, if I had a friend that told me about them experiencing OCD or something like that at work, I would say to them it's probably wise to actually talk about it to the people that they work with, to HR or whoever they need to at work. Because it might be that the reasonable adjustments they need to cope are probably available without too much fuss just by asking for them.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're right. Most HR, especially in the UK, most HR teams have various policies and stuff in place for mental health. And I always say if you don't want to say it's OCD, you can just go in, I'm struggling with anxiety at the minute, because anxiety seems to be way more socially acceptable. And that's kind of one way to, and then share all the information and policies they have in place. No, thanks for that. And okay, just general kind of words of wisdom. Is there anything you wanted to share with people who have OCD?
I think one of the things that I learned early on while I was training was that the treatment is quite effective. Yeah. The outcomes are quite good. So I would think the more you address it and seek professional help and actually talk about what you're experiencing, I would say the better your outcome's going to be. But I would say it's probably worth being quite reassuring to say that actually the outcomes are quite good, that OCD is very treatable. But obviously the first step really is seeking that treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. Good advice. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. So there you have it. I really hope that was of some use to you and you enjoyed it. And yeah, like I said, there is the forum on OCD Action. There's many sort of OCD forums and Facebook groups as well that you can continue this conversation and maybe chat with others who have OCD and get their take on what they do in various work situations that maybe you're struggling with right now. So quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It's not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And all the links and resources will be on the show notes at theocdstories.com and the links to OCD Action, etc. But thank you again to OCD Action and especially Olivia for organising this. Thanks a lot.